You're lying in a field that belongs to distance. The earth beneath you is cold and faintly damp, carrying the metallic scent of soil turned too often by war. Frost clings to the tips of grass, and the sky above has not yet decided to become morning. Your breath moves carefully, the way breath learns to move when sound is expensive. The horizon stretches without shelter. Somewhere far beyond sight, artillery speaks in low, patient murmurs. The rifle rests along your spine like a second bone. The world is wide, and you must become smaller than it. Before you settle deeper into the frost and distance, take a quiet moment to subscribe, only if stories of patience and stillness help you drift. And let us know where you're listening from, or which moment stays with you the most. You're listening to Echoes of War. The earth is cold before the light arrives. It holds the night longer than the sky does, and even now, when a pale line begins to gather along the horizon, the ground remains damp with frost. Grass bends under a thin white crust. The air tastes faintly of metal. Nothing moves except the slow breath of wind traveling low across the field, flattening what little grows between shell holes. Somewhere beyond sight, artillery mutters like distant thunder that has forgotten how to roll. She is already in position. Her body lies along the contour of the soil, weight distributed carefully, elbows set, cheek resting against wood darkened by oil and time. The rifle is not lifted yet. It rests parallel to her spine, patient. A canvas hood dulls the outline of her shoulders. Mud stains the knees of her uniform. The cold has reached her fingers, though she does not flex them. Movement is a decision. Decisions must wait. You do not see her face at first. The landscape hides it the way it hides everything, edges softened, lines interrupted, color thinned into early gray. The field ahead is empty in the way a field is never truly empty. There are folds in the ground where men could lie. There are shattered beams where light will later collect. There are paths worn by boots that no longer move. The horizon does not hurry. Behind her, several meters back, another figure settles lower into a shallow depression. The spotter checks a small notebook, then closes it without writing. There is nothing yet to record. The two shapes remain separate but connected by silence, by the shared understanding that the day will stretch long before it breaks. Words would thicken the air, so they leave it clear. The war here is not noise. It is patience. It is distance. It is the discipline of breath counted not for comfort, but for steadiness. The rifle waits because she waits. The earth waits because it has no choice. The sky grows lighter by degrees, so small they can only be noticed in hindsight. Her name is not yet spoken. For now, she is only a line pressed into soil, an angle of wood and steel beneath cloth, a pulse slowed by practice. The front has no interest in biography. It recognizes only silhouettes and motion. It rewards the one who remains unseen the longest. You watch the frost dissolve in patches where sunlight touches first. The field becomes textured again. The shallow craters show depth. The broken fence posts cast thin shadows. The day begins not with a sound, but with visibility. She raises the rifle. Not quickly, not dramatically. The movement is incremental, rehearsed so often that it barely registers as action. The butt settles into the hollow of her shoulder. Her left hand supports the barrel lightly, careful not to disturb the line. Her right eye aligns with glass. The world narrows to a circle. Inside that circle, the war rearranges itself. Distance collapses. A tree becomes bark. A stone becomes edge. A distant mound becomes a shape that might shift if observed long enough. The scope does not amplify emotion. It sharpens form. It teaches the eye to separate stillness from concealment. The first hours of light are the most delicate. Men move then. Supply lines adjust. Patrols reposition. Smoke thins and rises straight before wind takes it. She does not search frantically. She drifts across the terrain in measured arcs, returning often to the same points, memorizing them so that any deviation becomes visible. This is not hunting in the way stories describe. It is accounting. The spotter watches without glass, scanning the broader field, attuned to tremors that do not fit the pattern of grass and debris. When his hand touches her boot lightly, it is not urgency. It is direction. She adjusts 1 degree to the left. The circle fills with shadow near a collapsed wall. There is no immediate shot. There is only confirmation. The shadow must breathe. It must shift. It must betray itself by impatience. Minutes pass. The shadow remains ambiguous. She lowers the rifle slightly, not to abandon the possibility, but to conserve her muscles. Time is a resource that must be rationed like ammunition. The cold retreats slowly from her fingers. Sensation returns as dull ache. She ignores it. She counts her breath. 4 in, 4 held, 4 out. The rhythm becomes a background current beneath thought. If the body is steady, the mind steadies. If the mind steadies, the world simplifies. Behind the lines, engines start. Farther still, trains move supplies east and west, indifferent to who lies pressed into which patch of earth. Here, in this narrow strip between positions, the war compresses into vision and restraint. She shifts again, almost imperceptibly, redistributing weight before numbness sets in. The rifle remains aligned. The circle of glass remains patient. A figure appears at the edge of the wall. Not fully. A shoulder first. Then the outline of a helmet rising just above broken brick. It is a small movement, careless perhaps, or simply necessary. She does not react with speed. Speed belongs to surprise. She belongs to preparation. The breath leaves her lungs halfway and stops. The rifle settles deeper into bone. For a moment, the world inside the circle becomes still beyond nature. The wind seems to hold. The light pauses. Even the distant artillery waits its turn. You are close enough to see the texture of brick through her lens. Close enough to sense how narrow the margin is between observation and irrevocable decision. But the shot has not yet come. The morning remains suspended, balanced on the thin line between movement and consequence. The trigger does not break immediately. She remains within the half-breath, the pause between exhale and stillness, where the body feels weightless and the pulse recedes from the fingertips. The shape beyond the wall shifts again, only slightly, but enough to confirm intention. A helmet edge rises higher than before. A shoulder leans forward into light. The decision, once abstract, becomes mechanical. The rifle answers with a contained crack. It is not thunder. It is not the roaring violence the imagination prefers. It is a short, disciplined sound that vanishes almost as soon as it forms. The recoil presses into her shoulder and settles back into quiet. The scope lifts for an instant, then returns to its circle. Inside the glass, the helmet disappears. There is no dramatic fall, only absence. A shape that was present becomes no longer present. Dust lifts from brick and then drifts down again. The wall remains broken in the same places. The grass continues its low, wind-driven movement. The field does not acknowledge what has changed. She does not smile. She does not exhale sharply. She does not search for confirmation with urgency. Instead, she waits again. A shot invites response. Counterfire is often slower than expected, but rarely absent. She lowers her profile, pressing her chest closer to the soil, allowing the rifle to rest without tension. The spotter watches the wider terrain, eyes scanning for muzzle flash or disturbed earth. A bullet passes somewhere overhead, slicing the air with a sound too thin to locate precisely. It is followed by another, striking dirt several meters away. The earth accepts the impact with a muted thud. No one speaks. You feel the landscape contract. Where minutes ago the field seemed open, it now feels crowded with unseen sightlines. Every broken beam could conceal another barrel. Every ridge could hide a pair of eyes. The act of firing has drawn invisible lines between positions. The geometry of survival shifts. She does not rise. Instead, she inches backward, slow as the movement of shadow across stone. The rifle moves first, then her elbows, then her knees. Each motion is separated by waiting. A full retreat would announce itself. A gradual retreat blends into terrain. The spotter mirrors her, retreating in staggered rhythm until both bodies are once again part of the ground rather than distinct from it. The sun climbs higher. Light thickens across the field, revealing details that were previously suggestion. The broken wall glows pale against darker earth. No movement follows the fallen silhouette. The exchange has ended as quietly as it began. Behind them, in trenches and shallow dugouts, other soldiers mark the morning in different ways. Some boil thin coffee over small stoves. Some wrap bandages tighter. Some write letters on paper already smudged by handling. The war contains many rhythms at once. Here, in this narrow space between lines, the rhythm is measured in patience and recoil. She checks the chamber without haste. The bolt slides back. A casing ejects and lands softly in dirt. Another round seats forward with muted precision. The rifle returns to readiness. Ammunition is counted not only in cartridges, but in restraint. To fire is to reveal. To reveal is to invite response. Each shot must justify its exposure. Her cheek rests once more against the stock. The circle of glass resumes its quiet survey. The wall remains empty. The grass continues its patient sway. A crow crosses the sky, wing beats steady, indifferent to front lines drawn by men. She tracks the horizon again, not searching for victory, but for deviation. You begin to understand that this work is less about aggression than about subtraction. Removing motion, removing threat, removing oneself from visibility. The sniper's world narrows until only what can be seen through glass truly exists. Everything beyond that circle becomes rumor. Hours will pass before another opportunity appears. The body will stiffen. The cold will return where sweat cools against cloth. Hunger will register as a distant pressure, secondary to posture. The sun will tilt westward and change the angle of shadow along the same broken wall. The field will look different and yet remain the same. Her name is spoken later, in reports and citations and foreign newspapers. Here, in this first light, she is only a woman pressed into earth, breathing carefully, allowing the war to come into focus one narrow degree at a time. The Eastern Front stretches beyond sight. Cities burn. Armies move. Lines advance and retreat across maps pinned inside distant headquarters. But here, on this strip of scarred ground, the conflict reduces itself to stillness, to glass, to the fragile discipline of not moving when every instinct urges otherwise. The line of earth. The ground is not chosen once. It is chosen repeatedly, each morning, each repositioning, each time the lines shift by meters or by miles. A sniper's first task is not to fire, but to lie correctly, to align the body with terrain in a way that dissolves distinction. The soil must accept her weight without announcing it. The grass must bend without snapping. Even broken stone can betray impatience if disturbed carelessly. She studies the earth before she studies the enemy. Near Odessa, the soil is dry and granular, light enough to drift into cuffs and collar with the slightest movement. Near Sevastopol, the ground holds more moisture, clinging to cloth, imprinting itself against knees and elbows. In both places, the surface bears scars from artillery, shallow depressions that gather shadow at certain hours and glare at others. These scars become positions. They become shelter, though they were not intended to protect. She does not lie flat immediately. First she observes how the light moves across the field. Morning light sharpens edges and exposes texture. Afternoon light softens forms and lengthens shadow. Each hour reshapes the land. A depression that conceals at dawn may betray at dusk. The rifle's alignment must anticipate these changes before they occur. You notice how small the calculations are. A ridge only inches high can interrupt the line of sight. A patch of darker grass can disguise a sleeve if the color matches closely enough. Even the angle of a discarded plank must be considered, because wood reflects differently than soil. These are not dramatic concerns. They are quiet adjustments, made without spectacle, yet they determine survival. When she lowers herself into position, she does so in stages. Elbows first, then forearms, allowing the rifle to rest before her chest fully settles. Her hips shift slightly to reduce strain along the spine. Knees dig shallow grooves, toes angled outward for balance. Each contact with earth is deliberate. She presses downward only until the surface accepts her. No further. The wind matters more than temperature. A steady wind can cover the faintest rustle. A sudden lull amplifies the smallest sound. She waits through changes, learning the pattern of movement across grass and debris. When the breeze runs consistently from left to right, she adjusts her sight to compensate. When it falters, she refrains. The earth may conceal her, but the air remains restless. Behind her, trenches hold their own quiet labor. Men repair sandbags. Ammunition is redistributed. Messages pass from hand to hand. These activities are muted compared to artillery barrages elsewhere along the front. Here, in this sector, the war expresses itself in proximity rather than explosion. The lines are close enough that individual shapes matter. She studies those shapes through glass. A broken cartwheel leaning against a mound. A strip of cloth caught on wire. A collapsed roof beam lying at an unnatural angle. Each object must be memorized in its exact orientation. If it shifts by even a fraction, it will draw the eye immediately. The mind, trained to catalogue stillness, reacts sharply to deviation. The rifle is not heavy when she is still. Its weight becomes noticeable only during transition, when muscles engage to lift or pivot. In rest, the rifle feels like an extension of bone. The wood is warmed by contact. The metal, though cold to the touch at first light, gradually loses its sharpness as body heat transfers through palm and cheek. She does not think of the rifle as weapon first. It is an instrument of alignment, a device that narrows the world to manageable dimensions. Through its scope, chaos becomes geometry. A distant trench becomes a horizontal line intersected by vertical forms. A human figure becomes angles and distances rather than expression. You begin to see how the field rearranges itself into abstraction. The longer she observes, the less the terrain appears as landscape and the more it resembles a diagram. Lines intersect. Shadows indicate depth. Movement becomes an equation of speed and distance. The body on the ground is not thinking in slogans or fear. It is calculating. Time does not pass evenly. Minutes stretch when nothing moves. Seconds compress when something does. She marks time not by clocks but by sensation. The numbness creeping into fingers signals 1 hour. The ache along the lower back signals another. The position must occasionally be altered by degrees too small to attract attention. She shifts a fraction. Her left elbow advances 1/2 an inch. The rifle's barrel follows the arc of her adjustment. Grass parts silently. She settles again, allowing the field to reclaim its previous stillness. Nothing in the distance has reacted. The line of earth remains unbroken. The spotter behind her remains equally motionless. He scans without magnification, looking not for detail but for anomaly. His field of vision is broader, less precise, but essential. When he taps the sole of her boot lightly, the signal contains no urgency. It indicates direction. She adjusts without lifting her head. A distant trench shows subtle disturbance. Not enough to confirm intention. Just a faint ripple where fabric brushes against edge. She watches without haste. The rifle rests. The decision to fire is secondary to the decision to wait. Patience is not absence of action. It is sustained preparation. Across the front, artillery erupts in other sectors. The sound travels as dull vibration through soil before reaching her ears. The earth beneath her absorbs the concussion, translating it into tremor rather than roar. Dust lifts in thin veils from nearby debris and settles again. The line of sight remains intact. She remains pressed into the ground. The war here is not advancing in visible surges. It is holding. It is measuring. It is observing as intently as she does. Somewhere beyond the ridge, another sniper may lie in mirrored posture, watching her lines for similar deviation. You feel how narrow the margin becomes, between observation and exposure, between invisibility and silhouette. The field contains no clear boundary between safety and threat. It is a continuous surface where concealment depends on restraint more than cover. The sun rises higher. Heat replaces the early chill. The soil warms against her palms. Sweat gathers beneath collar and cap, but she does not wipe it away. Movement must justify itself. Even discomfort is endured until it becomes necessary to correct. In this state, the body becomes landscape. Her spine follows the contour of earth. Her breath aligns with wind. The rifle rests as naturally as a branch fallen into grass. The line between soldier and terrain thins until it nearly disappears. The day continues without spectacle. No dramatic assault, no shouted orders, only the slow oscillation of light and shadow across the same broken wall, the same shallow depression, the same faint suggestion of motion where none may exist. She waits, and the earth holds her shape without comment. The position chosen at dawn does not remain perfect by midday. Light changes its angle, and with it, the character of concealment. What had been shadow becomes reflection. What had seemed level reveals a slight incline. The earth does not shift beneath her, but perception does, and perception determines survival. She lifts her eye from the scope only long enough to re-evaluate the terrain without magnification. The field must be seen whole before it is narrowed again. The soil beneath her forearms has grown warm. Moisture from early frost has evaporated, leaving a fine powder that clings to fabric and skin. When she inhales, she tastes dust. It settles at the back of the throat, subtle but persistent. She does not cough. A cough is louder than a rifle shot when proximity is measured in meters. Behind her, the trenches have quieted. Midday brings a temporary lull. Men conserve energy for the hours that tend to erupt toward evening. A pot of thin soup passes between hands. A medic rewraps a bandage. A messenger crouches low as he moves, though no direct fire reaches this section now. Even in relative calm, habits of caution remain. She does not relax. Relaxation suggests slackness. Instead, she redistributes tension. Her right hand shifts slightly along the stock, finding a position that reduces strain without altering alignment. Her left knee angles outward a degree, easing pressure on the hip. These are adjustments of endurance, not comfort. You observe how the world through glass changes as the sun rises. Heat begins to shimmer above the earth. The scope's clarity softens at longer distances. Edges blur slightly, not enough to obscure but enough to distort. She compensates by narrowing focus, centering on closer sectors where mirage has less effect. The rifle is steady, but the air itself bends light into uncertainty. A bird lands near the collapsed wall. Its presence is sudden but unthreatening. She tracks it briefly, not from suspicion but from discipline. Anything that moves must be acknowledged. The bird hops, pecks, lifts again, disappearing behind debris. The wall remains intact. No human silhouette follows. The afternoon deepens. Shadow gathers beneath broken beams and inside shallow craters. These shadows are not static. They lengthen and stretch, connecting once separate dark spaces into continuous bands. A figure moving through them could remain concealed longer than in the morning. She recalculates distances in this altered geometry. The spotter leans forward slightly. His notebook opens without sound. He marks coordinates of structures and terrain features already memorized but now rendered different by light. The act of writing is deliberate and minimal. Paper rustles faintly. The sound is absorbed by wind. Across the field, a sliver of metal catches sunlight. It is brief, almost imagined. She centers the scope on that point and waits. The metal does not flash again immediately. It might be debris. It might be the edge of equipment. It might be nothing. She does not assume. Assumption invites error. Minutes pass. The body begins to register fatigue in places unrelated to the rifle. The neck stiffens first. Then the small muscles between shoulder blades burn softly. These signals are familiar. She anticipates them, meeting each with measured adjustment rather than reaction. The sliver of light returns. This time it is clearer, a reflective edge, rising slightly above earth. It holds for a fraction longer than before, then disappears. She steadies her breathing, allowing the rhythm to slow before deciding whether the movement belongs to metal or to imagination. You sense the narrowing of attention. The circle of glass excludes everything beyond its boundary. The trench behind her fades. The distant artillery becomes vibration rather than sound. Only the slight irregularity ahead holds meaning. Even time contracts around it. The edge rises again. Not high, not boldly, just enough to suggest intent. The line is too straight to be random. She does not fire. Not yet. She waits for the motion that confirms posture rather than accident. A shoulder follows. It emerges cautiously from behind earth and debris, seeking a line of sight. The opposing sniper is patient too. He advances by increments. The duel, if it becomes one, will not be loud or prolonged. It will hinge on recognition measured in seconds. She exhales halfway and stops. The rifle is aligned. The crosshair rests where the silhouette must complete itself to act. Her pulse slows deliberately, guided by discipline rather than instinct. The field around the figure remains undisturbed. No supporting movement is visible. The shoulder rises a fraction more. She adjusts 1 degree upward. The rifle speaks again, controlled and brief. The recoil is absorbed through bone into earth. Dust lifts near the opposing position. The reflective edge falls from view. There is no cry. Only the soft collapse of metal against soil. She remains motionless after the shot. Counterfire may follow, but none comes immediately. Perhaps the opposing sniper was alone. Perhaps he had moved too far forward to signal his partner. Perhaps the angle had exposed him more than he intended. She does not speculate. She returns to observation. The field settles. Wind resumes its steady pattern. The afternoon light continues to tilt westward. Heat shimmer persists but lessens slightly as sun begins its descent. The spotter waits several minutes before touching her boot lightly, signaling readiness to withdraw if necessary. They do not withdraw yet. Instead, they remain long enough to ensure no immediate retaliation reshapes the terrain. Only when the silence proves consistent do they retreat, inch by measured inch, back toward trench lines that offer marginally greater cover. You notice how unceremonious the conclusion feels. There is no celebration, no raised voice. The field does not mark the fallen beyond a subtle alteration in outline. The war continues in adjacent sectors, indifferent to this small subtraction. By the time she reaches the trench, the day has softened. The rifle is cleaned with quiet precision. The bolt removed. The barrel swabbed. Oil applied sparingly. Each movement is methodical, almost tender. Maintenance is not ritual for comfort, but preparation for repetition. The next dawn will require the same discipline. Her name remains unspoken here. Among soldiers, she is known by rank and by reliability. The line of earth remembers her weight more than her biography. Tomorrow she will press into it again. The field will rearrange under different light. The same broken wall will cast a new shadow. The work will resume not because of ambition, but because the line holds. And she remains part of it. Glass and distance. The rifle changes the scale of the world. Without it, the field is broad and indifferent, a stretch of broken ground that dissolves into haze beyond a few hundred meters. With glass raised to the eye, that same distance compresses into detail. The far trench becomes a series of boards. A distant mound becomes layered soil. A human outline, once indistinct, becomes measurable. She does not look through the scope immediately. First she studies the field with her bare eyes, allowing depth to remain natural. Distance must be understood in its full expanse before it is narrowed. Only then does she bring the rifle upward, aligning cheek to stock, eyelid steady against the rim of metal. The circle forms again. It is never perfectly still at first. Even the smallest tremor of muscle shifts the image. She waits for the body to settle, for breath to find its rhythm. When the crosshair ceases to drift and instead floats gently with the pulse, she knows the alignment has been achieved. You notice how quiet the transformation is. There is no sound when distance collapses. No visible seam between wide horizon and magnified detail. The glass performs its work silently, turning abstraction into texture. The war, once vast and sprawling, becomes confined to a measured frame. She studies a ridgeline. The ridge appears modest without magnification, but through the scope it reveals subtle variations in soil and shadow. A narrow depression runs along its crest. A fragment of wood juts at an angle that suggests prior construction. She memorizes these forms, fixing them in mind so that deviation can be detected instantly. The spotter does not look through glass. His role is broader. He watches for movement outside her narrowed field. If something occurs beyond the circle, he will guide her attention. This division of sight is deliberate. One sees deeply, the other sees widely. Together, they reduce surprise. Morning air carries little distortion. The early hours offer clarity. The glass shows edges sharply defined. A helmet rim glints distinctly. The folds of a coat can be distinguished from rock. She prefers these hours. They reward patience with precision. Distance is not guessed. It is calculated. The scope's markings align with known measurements. She estimates range by comparing known heights of structures to the subtensions in the reticle. A standing figure at 200 meters appears at one scale. At 400, another. The mind learns to translate these differences automatically. You sense how arithmetic replaces impulse. The trigger is not pulled because of anger or fear. It is pulled only when distance, wind, posture, and timing converge. If one variable remains uncertain, she waits. Waiting costs nothing. Error costs exposure. The wind shifts. A slight crosswind begins to press from right to left. She observes its effect on grass and loose debris. A torn scrap of cloth flutters in consistent rhythm. The movement is small but sufficient to alter trajectory at longer ranges. She adjusts her aim fractionally to compensate, not by instinct, but by repetition of prior experience. The glass demands stillness. If she moves her head too quickly, the image distorts. If she breathes too sharply, the crosshair jerks. The scope magnifies error as readily as it magnifies detail. It is unforgiving of haste. She lowers the rifle briefly. The eye must rest. Extended focus through glass strains perception. Colors dull. Edges blur. When she looks up again with bare sight, the world feels oddly wide, almost overwhelming in its breadth. She allows the sensation to pass before returning to the narrowed circle. The war beyond the lens is immense. Armies reposition miles away. Orders travel through chains of command. Artillery patterns shift according to strategy drafted on paper far removed from this field. Yet here, through glass, the conflict becomes intimate and immediate. A figure appears near a trench line. Not fully exposed. Only a head rising cautiously above the rim. She centers the crosshair but does not fire. The range is long. Wind remains inconsistent. The figure retreats before conditions align. She does not resent the lost opportunity. She records it mentally as data. The day progresses. Heat builds. Mirage begins to ripple above sun-warmed Earth. The scope's image wavers slightly at extreme distance. She compensates by focusing closer, narrowing the effective range to preserve accuracy. Adaptation is constant. You observe how discipline extends beyond the shot. It governs when not to shoot. It governs when to lower the rifle and conserve strength. It governs how long to remain in a position before diminishing returns outweigh advantage. The spotter whispers a distance. The word is brief, almost indistinguishable from breath. She adjusts elevation accordingly. Their coordination has become economical, stripped of unnecessary language. Silence remains the primary medium. Across the field, movement resumes. A supply runner dashes between cover points. She tracks him briefly, calculating range and wind, but refrains. The target does not meet criteria of significance. Ammunition is finite. Exposure is costly. She allows him to pass. Glass reveals vulnerability in fragments. A sleeve extending too far from sandbag. A boot protruding beyond edge of trench. A rifle barrel lifted prematurely. These are not dramatic gestures. They are small lapses. The scope magnifies them into opportunity. She steadies once more. Breath slows. Crosshair aligns. The variables converge gradually, not abruptly. She feels the alignment before she confirms it visually. The rifle is ready. But readiness does not compel action. The war through glass is not a series of continuous shots. It is extended observation punctuated by precision. The majority of time is spent seeing, not firing. The sun shifts westward. Light angles differently across the ridgeline. The depression she memorized at dawn now casts deeper shadow. A figure within it would be harder to detect. She adjusts her scanning pattern accordingly, revisiting known sectors under new light. Distance remains constant, yet perception changes with each hour. The glass narrows the world, but it also teaches that even within narrowness, complexity persists. The field never repeats itself exactly. Wind, light, heat, and human caution reshape it continuously. She lowers the rifle again. The eye rests. The body remains aligned with earth. The mind recalibrates distance from memory rather than sight. In this rhythm of narrowing and widening, she maintains clarity. The day has not ended. The glass will rise again. By late afternoon, the glass no longer behaves as it did in morning light. Heat has lifted from the ground in steady currents for hours. The air shimmers faintly even at moderate range, bending straight lines into slight arcs. A trench that appeared sharply defined at dawn now wavers at its edges. She does not blame the scope. The instrument remains constant. It is the space between her and the target that has grown unstable. She adjusts her expectations. Long-range precision becomes less reliable. She narrows her attention to sectors where distortion is minimal. Distance, once crisp and measurable, now requires interpretation. She studies how mirage moves across the reticle, how it thickens in certain patches of earth and thins in others. You notice how patience deepens as clarity decreases. When the image wavers, she does not force it into certainty. She waits for the moment when air briefly steadies. Wind pauses occasionally, as if reconsidering direction. In those pauses, the field regains definition. A sandbag becomes textured again. A helmet rim regains its straightness. The rifle remains balanced against her shoulder. Her cheek presses lightly against the wood, enough to maintain alignment but not enough to strain the neck. The muscles along her back have begun to ache in a familiar pattern. She acknowledges the discomfort without adjusting yet. The cost of movement must be weighed against the cost of fatigue. The spotter shifts slightly. His wider view has detected activity beyond her narrowed field. A small team moving cautiously between cover points. He murmurs a bearing and a rough distance. She pivots gradually, careful not to scrape fabric against dry grass. The circle settles on a section of trench she has not examined closely since morning. A figure kneels briefly to adjust equipment. The posture is awkward, exposed. The distance is moderate. Wind presses from left to right now, more consistent than before. She calculates drift without conscious enumeration. The body has internalized the arithmetic through repetition. She does not fire immediately. The kneeling figure rises partially, then crouches again. The motion is indecisive. She watches for completion. A shot must coincide with stillness, not transition. Movement introduces variables that cannot be fully controlled. The figure steadies. She exhales halfway. The crosshair rests slightly ahead of center, compensating for wind. The trigger breaks with restrained pressure. The recoil is familiar. The scope lifts and returns. Through the circle, the figure collapses into the trench, vanishing from view. The surrounding soldiers react with brief, disordered motion, then retreat deeper into cover. Dust rises and settles. She lowers the rifle slightly. Not in relief. In assessment. Counterfire may follow. She studies the ridge opposite for the briefest flash of retaliation. None appears. The opposing position remains quiet. You feel how narrow the exchange has been. A movement observed. A calculation completed. A subtraction made. The field absorbs the change without visible scar. Distance remains unchanged, yet the geometry of threat has shifted subtly. She remains in position longer than necessary. Sometimes the second opportunity emerges when tension relaxes. A companion rushing to assist. A careless glance above the trench. She waits, but the enemy has learned caution quickly. No further exposure follows. The sun begins its descent. Shadows lengthen across broken ground, softening edges once more. Mirage weakens as temperature falls. The glass regains clarity in patches. The world through the lens steadies. She re-examines earlier sectors. The collapsed wall from morning. The ridgeline depression. The fragment of wood angled unnaturally. Each appears altered by light, but identical in form. She commits their evening versions to memory as she did their morning ones. The discipline of glass is cumulative. Every hour of observation builds a map not on paper, but in the mind. She learns the terrain so thoroughly that deviation registers instinctively. A sandbag tilted a degree too far. A helmet appearing where none existed before. The scope becomes less a tool of discovery and more a device of confirmation. Her eye tires. She blinks slowly before lifting her head. The world without magnification feels almost exaggerated in breadth. The sky appears vast. The field stretches wider than seems manageable. She allows her vision to readjust before lowering the rifle once more. Distance remains indifferent. It neither favors nor resists her. It simply exists as measurement. The glass translates it into decision. Without the scope, she would be one soldier among many scanning a broad horizon. With it, she becomes a point of convergence where precision alters outcomes invisibly. The spotter closes his notebook. Evening approaches. The light will soon favor concealment too heavily for reliable engagement. They will withdraw before darkness fully descends. Night belongs to different tactics, different dangers. She waits through the final minutes of usable light. No further targets present themselves. The field grows quiet, almost deceptively so. The broken wall darkens. The ridgeline blends into surrounding earth. The air cools, carrying the faint scent of smoke from distant sectors. She lowers the rifle completely. The glass no longer serves. In darkness, magnification becomes liability. She slides the bolt back, checks the chamber, and secures the weapon with practiced care. The rifle returns to sling, resting against her shoulder as she begins the slow retreat toward trench lines. You sense the widening of perception as she moves. Without the lens, the war expands again. Sounds become more prominent. Distant artillery, previously muted by focus, now echoes across open ground. Voices murmur behind sandbags. The night gathers without spectacle. Distance will return tomorrow. The glass will narrow the world again. The arithmetic will resume. For now, the field holds only shadow and cooling air. She leaves no visible trace. The earth settles where she lay. Grass straightens slowly. The line of sight empties. And the measure of distance waits for morning. The weight of hours. Time behaves differently when measured against earth. In trenches, it is marked by rations, by sentry rotations, by the passing of mess tins and folded letters. In artillery units, it is marked by barrages and silence between them. For her, time is marked by the length of stillness sustained without consequence. She settles into position before sunrise. The soil is colder today. A thin film of frost has formed in the shallow depression she occupies. It seeps through fabric slowly, touching skin not with shock but with persistence. She feels it first along the forearms, then along the ribs where breath presses her chest against ground. The rifle rests parallel to her spine while she adjusts to the temperature without movement. The body resists immobility at first. Muscles accustomed to motion complain quietly when asked to remain still. The lower back tightens. The neck strains against the weight of the head. Even the fingers ache from holding readiness without action. She does not respond immediately to these signals. She waits until the discomfort stabilizes into something manageable. You observe how endurance begins before any target appears. The field ahead is empty in early light. No silhouettes break the horizon. No reflective edges betray presence. Yet the work has already begun. To lie here, pressed into frost and soil, is itself an exertion that accumulates hour by hour. Breath becomes anchor. 4 slow counts inward. A pause. 4 outward. The rhythm steadies pulse and thought. If breath accelerates, the crosshair will drift. If thought wanders, attention will dull. The body and mind must align long before engagement. The spotter behind her remains silent. He has wrapped cloth around his face to shield against cold wind. His eyes scan without magnification, attentive to broad movement while she prepares for narrow focus. Between them stretches a quiet understanding. Most of the day will be spent waiting. The sun rises gradually. Frost recedes from exposed soil but lingers in shaded hollows. As light strengthens, she lowers the rifle into position. The glass reveals a field unchanged from yesterday and yet subtly altered. A sandbag has been repositioned. A plank leans at a new angle. Someone across the line has repaired a trench lip overnight. She registers each modification without reaction. Change does not always signal opportunity. It signals vigilance. The opposing side, too, observes and adjusts. The front is a living boundary, shifting in increments too small for maps to record. An hour passes without incident. The body begins to protest in more insistent ways. Pins of numbness gather along her left thigh where weight rests too heavily. Her right shoulder stiffens from maintaining contact with the stock. She calculates whether adjustment can be made safely. You feel how the decision to move is weighed like ammunition. To shift posture relieves strain but risks disturbance. To remain still preserves concealment but deepens fatigue. She waits until a gust of wind sweeps across grass and debris, masking subtle sound. In that moment, she inches her knee outward, redistributing pressure. The relief is brief but sufficient. Another hour passes. The sun climbs higher, warming the soil and dissolving the last frost. Moisture evaporates into faint vapor that shimmers in early heat. The body adjusts to new discomfort as cold gives way to warmth. Sweat gathers beneath collar and cap, stinging where fabric rubs against skin. No targets present themselves. A distant helmet appears once, then disappears before range and wind align. She does not pursue it. The day is long. Impulse is expensive. Time stretches. Without engagement, perception sharpens in unexpected ways. The rustle of grass becomes distinct from the whisper of wind. The faint shift of sandbag cloth stands out against stillness. She catalogues these sounds, building familiarity so that anomaly will stand apart. The hours accumulate not in dramatic events, but in sustained restraint. She drinks sparingly from a canteen, careful not to lift it too high. The motion is slow and concealed within the contour of her body. Even swallowing is measured. The field must not sense her presence through careless movement. You begin to understand that the weight of hours is heavier than the rifle. The rifle rests predictably. Time presses unevenly. It tests patience more severely than recoil. It invites distraction, invites thought to drift toward memory or speculation. She keeps her attention anchored to terrain. A faint movement near the ridgeline draws her eye. Not enough to confirm. Only a subtle irregularity where shadow meets soil. She centers the scope and waits. Minutes pass. Nothing follows. The shadow remains static. She does not relax. The uncertainty itself requires endurance. To watch without resolution drains energy in ways more subtle than firing. The mind strains against ambiguity. The sun reaches its height. Heat settles across the field. The air grows dense. The body grows heavy against ground. She remains aligned, resisting the urge to stretch or sit upright. The work continues not through action, but through persistence. Another hour passes. Stillness deepens into something almost meditative, yet never safe. Beneath the calm surface lies constant calculation. If a figure rises, she must be ready instantly. There is no gradual transition from waiting to firing. The shift must occur within breath. You sense how thin the margin is, between sustained immobility and sudden precision, between patience and irreversible decision. The day has not yet broken its silence. She remains pressed into earth, allowing the weight of hours to settle across her without surrendering to it. By mid-afternoon, the strain has migrated. It no longer resides only in muscle. It settles behind the eyes, in the quiet tension required to remain alert without stimulus. The field has offered little movement today. No clear silhouettes. No extended exposures. The hours accumulate without punctuation. She remains aligned. The rifle rests steady against her shoulder. Her cheek maintains contact with wood that has grown warm from prolonged touch. The heat beneath her uniform is no longer sharp but heavy, a slow pressure that dulls sensation rather than intensifies it. You notice how silence begins to distort perception. When nothing moves for long enough, the mind begins to invent motion, a flicker at the edge of vision, a tremor in grass that resolves into wind. She has learned not to trust the first impression. Every anomaly must repeat itself before it earns response. The spotter shifts once. A careful adjustment of weight, masked by the rise of wind. He has been still as long as she has. His wider view reveals no change. The front, for this stretch of hours, is suspended in mutual vigilance. The sun tilts westward. Shadows grow longer again, reversing the arc of morning. The ridgeline that seemed flat at noon now acquires depth. The depression along its crest darkens. She revisits it through glass, measuring its contours under altered light. Fatigue tempts the body toward micromovements. A twitch in the calf. A tightening of fingers. She resists until necessity dictates correction. When the ache in her shoulder becomes sharp enough to compromise steadiness, she waits for wind to rise, then shifts her grip minutely. The relief is subtle but meaningful. The hours have weight not because of action, but because of restraint. Each choice not to move requires attention. Each second of continued stillness demands renewal of intention. You feel how endurance becomes discipline rather than passive waiting. There is effort in remaining unchanged. There is concentration in sustaining posture, while heat fades and cool air begins to return. At last, movement emerges. A single figure rises from behind a sandbag at moderate range. The motion is cautious but longer sustained than earlier glimpses. She centers the crosshair without haste. Distance is manageable. Wind has softened. The body transitions from endurance to precision within one breath. Exhale. Pause. The trigger yields under controlled pressure. The rifle responds with its contained crack. The figure drops from sight. There is no surge of emotion, only the familiar recoil and return to observation. She remains in position, anticipating retaliation. None comes immediately. The field absorbs the change as it has absorbed others. You notice how quickly the body returns to waiting. The moment of action is brief compared to the hours that precede it. Fatigue resumes its quiet claim. The shoulder aches again. The neck stiffens anew. The rifle rests. The sun nears the horizon. Light softens. Heat dissipates. A faint chill returns, less severe than morning frost, but sufficient to remind her how long she has remained prone. The body is slower to respond now, heavier with accumulated strain. She lowers the rifle briefly. The eye must recover from prolonged focus. The world without glass appears expanded, almost disorienting. She allows vision to widen before narrowing it again for a final scan. No further movement appears. The field darkens gradually. Edges blur into shadow. Precision yields to uncertainty. She recognizes the limit and does not press beyond it. They withdraw as they arrived, incrementally, without urgency. The body unfolds from earth slowly, muscles protesting transition. Knees straighten. Spine rises. Blood returns to limbs with dull ache. You sense how the day has altered her not through drama, but through duration. Hours of stillness leave imprint. The earth has held her weight. The glass has narrowed her world repeatedly. The rifle has spoken only once today, yet the strain of readiness has persisted throughout. Back in the trench, she cleans the weapon as always. Bolt removed. Barrel swabbed. Oil applied. Hands steady despite fatigue. Maintenance restores rhythm. Tomorrow will require the same discipline. The weight of hours does not vanish with darkness. It lingers in muscle memory, in the stiffness carried into sleep, in the awareness that dawn will demand renewed immobility. The field lies quiet now, but the endurance it required remains. The arithmetic of attrition. The numbers do not announce themselves. They accumulate quietly, like frost along a trench lip or dust within the folds of a sleeve. No single morning feels historic. No single shot reshapes the front in visible measure. Yet somewhere behind the lines, in a ledger carried between dugouts and command posts, marks are made in careful ink. She does not see the ledger at first. Her work remains the same as it has been: lie correctly, measure distance, wait for deviation. But after certain engagements, a runner approaches with questions. Range, position, confirmation. The language shifts slightly. The shot must be verified. You notice how the vocabulary grows more precise. It is no longer only about what was seen. It is about who witnessed it. The spotter must corroborate. Another unit may be asked to observe the position through their own glass. If possible, a body must be seen clearly before darkness conceals it. The field becomes not only terrain, but record. A fallen silhouette is no longer just subtraction. It is an entry. The confirmation of a kill transforms the moment into data. The war counts in many ways: tonnage of artillery, kilometers gained or lost, but here it counts in individuals reduced to notation. She does not celebrate confirmation. The mark made in ink does not alter the frost on the ground the next morning. It does not ease the ache in her shoulder. It does not quiet the distant artillery. It simply adds one more digit to a column that grows gradually over weeks. Attrition has a rhythm. The Eastern Front does not pivot on single duels alone. It grinds. It wears. It subtracts slowly from both sides. A sniper's contribution is minute within that vast calculus, yet it is consistent. Each confirmed shot weakens a position, removes a rifle, diminishes morale in ways not immediately visible. You begin to sense how repetition alters perception. The first confirmed kill required intense focus, deliberate confirmation, extended waiting afterward. By the 10th, the procedure is familiar. By the 20th, it is routine. The act remains precise, but its psychological weight shifts subtly. Morning positions return as before. Frost, soil, glass raised to eye. The environment repeats itself. Yet beneath that repetition, the tally grows. She knows the number without needing to consult a ledger. It is carried quietly in memory, not as pride but as measure of duration. The spotter records coordinates after each confirmed engagement. Small notations: distance, wind direction, time of day. These details are not romantic. They are procedural. If another sniper replaces her in this sector, he will benefit from accumulated observation. Attrition depends on continuity as much as courage. The opposing side adapts. Positions shift more frequently. Helmets rise less often above trench lines. The enemy sniper, once exposed too long, now advances more cautiously. The arithmetic of subtraction prompts countercalculation. Both sides refine method. She senses the adjustment. Targets appear briefer now. Movements are shorter, more guarded. The time required to confirm opportunity lengthens. Patience deepens further. You observe how the ledger shapes the field indirectly. The knowledge that someone counts alters behavior on both sides. To be counted is to become aware of exposure. To count is to accept that repetition defines survival. The day unfolds without engagement. No confirmed shot. No entry added. Yet the arithmetic continues. The absence of addition is itself a variable. The enemy may be repositioning. Or perhaps caution has deepened enough to limit exposure entirely. She does not interpret immediately. The discipline of observation persists regardless of tally. Attrition is not a race. It is endurance extended across months. In the trench, rumors circulate. They speak of high numbers achieved by certain marksmen, of rival snipers whose tallies rise on both sides. These stories travel through dugouts, lending shape to otherwise invisible work. Her name begins to circulate quietly, not loudly, not as legend, but as reliability, as someone whose sector has grown quieter over weeks. The arithmetic has begun to attach itself to a person. You feel the subtle shift. The field remains the same. Frost, dust, broken walls. Yet behind it, the knowledge of count alters perception. Each shot carries the awareness that it contributes to an accumulation beyond the moment. She lies in position again. The rifle steady. The glass narrow. The arithmetic unseen but present. The war does not move dramatically today. It subtracts. The ledger eventually finds its way closer to the front. Not the physical book itself, but its implications. A political officer visits the trench line one afternoon, boots sinking slightly into damp soil. He does not remain long. He speaks quietly with the unit commander, glances toward the sector she watches, and nods with restrained approval. The arithmetic has been noticed. She is told the current number. It is spoken without ceremony. A figure confirmed by cross-witnessing and report. The officer's tone suggests commendation, yet the air around them remains unchanged. The trench smells of oil and damp cloth. The sky carries low clouds. The field beyond still waits in patient geometry. You sense how the number feels different when voiced aloud. Carried silently, it was weightless. Spoken, it acquires dimension. It becomes something that can be compared, ranked, evaluated. The work that had felt solitary now intersects with expectation. The next morning, she returns to the line as before. The frost lies thin across the depression. The rifle settles against her shoulder. The glass narrows the world into its quiet circle. Nothing in the terrain acknowledges the arithmetic attached to her name. The broken wall remains broken. The ridgeline remains measured. Yet awareness lingers. Each potential shot now carries an added layer. Not pressure, but recognition. The knowledge that confirmation will not disappear into anonymity. It will extend the column. The opposing side responds in kind. Sniper duels become more deliberate. A helmet rises only to disappear instantly. A shadow lingers long enough to suggest bait. The field grows more deceptive as both sides learn from subtraction. She resists haste. Attrition favors consistency, not bravado. A sniper who rushes to inflate tally invites error. She remains governed by the same principles that preceded recognition. Distance measured carefully, wind compensated, breath controlled. You notice how repetition protects clarity. When the arithmetic grows visible, it threatens to distort intention. The mind may begin to anticipate the next entry rather than evaluate conditions objectively. She counters this by narrowing attention even further. The circle of glass contains no numbers, only angles and movement. An opposing sniper reveals himself briefly, a glint too deliberate to be accidental. She steadies her breath and waits. The glint vanishes, then returns slightly offset. The duel is not theatrical. It is incremental. Minutes pass. Neither fires. The duel becomes endurance rather than exchange. She holds position, ignoring the strain in her back, waiting for deviation that is more than suggestion. At last, the opposing rifle rises fractionally above cover. Not enough to confirm head or shoulder fully, but enough to indicate imminent action. She adjusts elevation by memory rather than calculation. The trigger breaks. The recoil presses into her shoulder. Through the glass, the rifle across the line slips downward, striking the trench edge. No body is visible immediately. The spotter watches for confirmation. After several long minutes, a hand appears briefly, attempting to retrieve the fallen weapon, then withdraws abruptly. The absence of further movement suggests completion. Another entry will be made. You feel how the arithmetic deepens rather than concludes. Each confirmed subtraction reinforces the pattern. The opposing side will adjust further. Positions will shift again. The ledger will grow. Attrition is not climax. It is accumulation. By late afternoon, clouds gather. Light dims earlier than expected. Engagement opportunities narrow. She remains in position until the edge of visibility becomes unreliable. The field darkens into uniform gray. In the trench that evening, her name is spoken more openly. Comrades mention the Count with restrained respect, some with admiration, some with quiet disbelief. The number begins to travel beyond immediate sector, carried by rumor and official report alike. She listens without reaction. The arithmetic belongs to the war, not to her identity. Tomorrow the frost will return. The soil will demand endurance again. The glass will narrow distance without acknowledging prior totals. You sense how repetition protects her from transformation into symbol. As long as the work remains the same, lie, observe, calculate, wait, the number cannot distort the practice. Night settles across the front. The ledger rests in some distant shelter, its ink drying slowly. The field beyond lies silent, holding the marks of subtraction invisibly. She cleans the rifle once more. Bolt removed. Barrel swabbed. Oil applied sparingly. The ritual restores equilibrium. Attrition may be counted in ink, but it is sustained in maintenance. Tomorrow the arithmetic will resume. Not dramatically, not loudly, quietly. Woman among soldiers. Before the arithmetic grew, there was skepticism. It did not announce itself as hostility. It settled into the trench like damp air, subtle and persistent. When she first arrived at the unit, rifle slung across her back, uniform fitted but unmistakably altered to her frame, the glances were brief yet repeated. She had trained as others had trained. Range measured, breath disciplined, glass aligned. Yet the expectations surrounding her differed. Some soldiers assumed she would be assigned medical duties. Others imagined communications work. Few expected her to lie in frost for hours with rifle steady. You notice how doubt rarely arrives as open refusal. It appears instead as hesitation. A slight pause before handing her ammunition. A sideways look when positions are assigned. A suggestion that perhaps another sector might suit her better. She does not respond with argument. Argument would alter the environment more than demonstration. Instead, she prepares as always. The rifle is cleaned with precision, the scope adjusted carefully. Her posture in position remains exact. The first confirmed shot changes tone subtly, not dramatically. No cheers erupt, but conversation shifts. The glance becomes longer, less dismissive. Ammunition is handed without hesitation. The spotter assigned to her position treats instruction as collaboration rather than concession. The trench remains the same. Mud clings to boots. Tin cups circulate. Artillery sounds echo from adjacent sectors. Yet within this unchanged setting, perception alters incrementally. You sense how performance replaces debate. Each successful engagement subtracts doubt alongside enemy presence. Skepticism recedes not because it is challenged verbally, but because it loses practical ground. Yet visibility brings its own weight. A woman on the line is not easily ignored. When she lies in position, even her stillness draws attention before it dissolves into terrain. A photograph taken for documentation lingers longer than those of others. Her image is circulated upward through command channels with interest. She remains focused on terrain. The broken wall does not care who watches from behind it. The ridgeline does not adjust its shadow because of expectation. The rifle responds identically in any shoulder. These constants anchor her against the subtle currents of perception. In the trench at dusk, conversation shifts around her presence. Some speak of mothers and sisters far behind the lines. Others compare her to heroines from earlier conflicts. The tone varies, admiration in one voice, unease in another. She listens without absorbing either fully. You observe how identity can be imposed externally. To some, she becomes emblem of resilience. To others, anomaly disrupting accustomed structure. Neither view alters the frost that gathers at dawn or the heat that shimmers at noon. Assignments begin to reflect trust. Sectors of greater exposure are offered without hesitation. Her position is no longer questioned. The spotter assigned to her rotates like others, but always with recognition of competence rather than novelty. The war continues its routine. Attrition persists. Glass narrows the world. The ledger grows. Within that repetition, her presence ceases to feel provisional. It becomes integrated. Yet beyond the trench, narratives begin forming. Reports mention her name more frequently. Command officers reference her count when speaking of morale. The arithmetic intersects with ideology. You sense the first hints of transformation, not from soldier to symbol fully, but from participant to example. The distinction is subtle at first. A remark here, a nod there, a request for confirmation of her number, delivered with particular emphasis. She returns to the line at dawn as always. Frost, soil, glass raised. The field does not acknowledge gender. It registers only movement. She remains pressed into earth, allowing the terrain to define her role more than commentary does. The skepticism that once hovered has thinned. In its place stands expectation. Expectation settles differently than doubt. Doubt hovers at the edge of visibility, waiting for failure. Expectation presses forward, anticipating continuation. In the trench, the tone around her shifts again as weeks pass. Her name is no longer spoken cautiously. It is spoken with a kind of assurance, as if her presence guarantees a certain steadiness in that sector of the line. The front does not soften because of this change. Mud still gathers at the trench bottom after rain. Supplies still arrive late. Artillery still falls unpredictably in adjacent sectors. The war maintains its indifference. Yet within the human space of the trench, her role is now established. You notice how routine absorbs anomaly. Where once she drew glances upon entering a dugout, now she is greeted with the same brief nods exchanged among others. A cup of tea is passed without hesitation. Ammunition is counted out in equal measure. Conversation continues uninterrupted by her presence. Yet the distinction has not vanished entirely. When a photographer arrives one afternoon, summoned by higher command, his lens lingers. He adjusts the angle of light slightly. He requests that she remain still for a moment longer than others. The image captured is not of frost or dust, but of her face aligned behind glass. She complies without expression. The rifle rests against her shoulder as it always does. The field stretches behind her in muted tones. The photograph will travel farther than she does, reaching offices where trenches are only abstractions on maps. In the days that follow, a political officer returns. This time, he speaks not only of tally but of representation. The presence of women in combat units is to be emphasized. The war demands not only subtraction at the front, but narrative reinforcement behind it. You sense the tension between work and symbol. She remains governed by terrain and glass. Yet others begin to frame her within a broader story, of resilience, of ideological commitment, of collective strength. The arithmetic becomes evidence. Back in position at dawn, the earth remains constant. Frost gathers as before. The depression receives her weight without ceremony. The rifle narrows the world to its measured circle. Within that circle, no ideology appears, only angles and movement. A figure rises briefly along the ridgeline. She steadies, calculates wind, and fires. The recoil presses into bone. The silhouette falls. The field resumes its quiet. No narrative accompanies the act. The shot is neither proclamation nor statement. It is execution of discipline sustained through repetition. Yet beyond the line, reports may frame it differently. You observe how distance exists not only in meters, but in meaning. The space between trench and headquarters is filled with interpretation. What occurs as arithmetic here becomes symbol there. Her count grows not only as tally, but as example. Within the trench, reactions remain restrained. Comrades respect consistency more than rhetoric. They observe that her sector grows quieter over time. They adjust their own behavior accordingly. Trust deepens through evidence rather than speech. At dusk, when rifles are cleaned and boots are unlaced, she sits among them without ceremony. Mud flakes from fabric. Oil darkens cloth. Conversation drifts from practical matters to memory. Someone mentions a sister working in a factory far east. Another recalls a teacher from before the war. These fragments of civilian life drift briefly through the dugout. Her presence does not interrupt this exchange. She is neither emblem nor exception here. She is a soldier whose endurance has been demonstrated. Yet beyond the trench, the transformation continues. Her name appears in communiques. Her count is cited in speeches. The photograph circulates through offices and perhaps into newspapers. The image of a woman steady behind rifle acquires layers she does not directly control. You feel how identity can expand beyond intention. The frost tomorrow will not care about headlines. The soil will not adjust to recognition. The rifle will require cleaning as always. The glass will distort under heat. She remains anchored to repetition. In this anchoring lies resistance to distortion. As long as the work continues unchanged, lie, observe, calculate, wait, the symbol cannot fully replace the soldier. Night settles again across the front. In the dim light of a lantern, she inspects the bolt and barrel once more. Metal reflects faintly. Oil spreads thinly. The ritual persists. Expectation may grow, but dawn will still require stillness. Evacuation and removal. The change does not begin with ceremony. It begins with concussion. Sevastopol has endured bombardment for months. The air has grown accustomed to artillery, to the dull thud of impact traveling through earth before reaching the ear. Trenches have deepened. Sandbags have been replaced so often that the original stitching is no longer visible. The ridgelines she once memorized now bear fresh scars. She lies in position as before. Frost no longer gathers in the same way. Dust has been churned repeatedly by shellfire. The soil is uneven, fractured. Yet the discipline remains unchanged. Rifle aligned. Glass raised. Breath measured. An impact lands closer than usual. Not near enough to bury, but near enough to jar the ground beneath her ribs. Dust rises in a thick plume. The scope's image fractures briefly into vibration. She lowers the rifle until the earth steadies. You sense how the arithmetic falters under bombardment. Attrition by precision yields to attrition by volume. Artillery does not require confirmation through glass. It subtracts indiscriminately. The careful ledger of individual entries becomes irrelevant beneath saturation. Another shell lands nearer still. The concussion forces a decision. The spotter grips her sleeve, indicating withdrawal. This is not retreat born of caution alone. It is survival dictated by altered conditions. She begins to move backward, incrementally at first, then more decisively as impacts continue. The line of earth she has memorized dissolves under bombardment. The broken wall that once served as reference collapses entirely. The ridgeline depression fills with debris. Terrain loses its continuity. In the trench, urgency replaces routine. Orders pass quickly. Ammunition crates are redistributed. Some positions are abandoned. The war here has shifted from measured subtraction to forced endurance. You observe how removal begins without proclamation. A medical officer approaches her unit later that day. There are discussions beyond her hearing. Her count has grown substantial. Her visibility beyond the front has expanded. The calculus of risk has altered. She is informed quietly, not in the language of honor, but of necessity. She will be withdrawn from the most exposed positions. Her survival now carries value beyond immediate sector. She does not respond with protest. Protest would not reverse the shift. The artillery continues its distant percussion. The field she has known through glass is no longer stable. The next morning, she is not sent to the line. Instead, she remains within secondary positions. Her rifle rests across her knees rather than pressed into frost. The glass remains unused for longer stretches. The discipline of stillness is replaced by watchfulness without engagement. You feel the subtle dislocation. 4 months, her world has narrowed to a circle of precision. Now it widens without her consent. The field remains within reach, yet she is asked to stand apart from its most exposed edge. The arithmetic pauses, not because the war has ended, but because her role within it is being recalculated. The ledger continues elsewhere, carried by other hands. She cleans the rifle as always. The ritual persists even when engagement does not. Bolt removed. Barrel swabbed. Oil applied. Maintenance becomes anchor amid uncertainty. Sevastopol endures bombardment still. Positions crumble. Units withdraw in stages. Evacuation plans circulate in guarded whispers. The front, once held in measured equilibrium, begins to fracture. You sense the transition from repetition to rupture. Removal is not rest. It is displacement. She remains within the war, yet the ground beneath her has shifted from chosen depression to imposed distance. The rifle rests beside her. The glass remains clear. But the line of earth she once pressed into has been altered beyond recognition. Evacuation does not resemble retreat in the stories told afterward. It is not a single surge backward. It unfolds in fragments. Units leave at staggered intervals. Supplies are destroyed rather than carried. Trenches that once held steady observation become temporary shelters before abandonment. She is ordered to prepare for departure at dusk. The instruction arrives without emphasis. Her rifle is to accompany her. Personal items must be reduced to essentials. The trench, which has absorbed her weight through frost and heat alike, is to be left behind. You sense how departure feels quieter than bombardment. Shells still fall in adjacent sectors, but within her immediate space there is only the rustle of fabric, the tightening of straps, the closing of canteens. The line of earth that once defined her work lies beyond reach now, altered by concussion and command alike. She moves through familiar paths one final time. The depression where she lay for hours under winter frost is partially filled with debris. The broken wall that once marked distance has collapsed entirely. The ridgeline bears new scars, indistinguishable from older ones. Terrain she had memorized no longer matches memory. The arithmetic remains suspended. No entry will be made today from this sector. The ledger continues elsewhere. Her name, however, has traveled ahead of her. Command has decided that her presence carries weight beyond this collapsing front. You observe the dissonance between removal and identity. 4 months, she has measured herself against soil and glass. Now she is measured by count and recognition. The rifle, once an extension of bone pressed into earth, rests against a shoulder as she boards transport under cover of dark. The sea air carries salt and smoke. Evacuation from Sevastopol occurs amid urgency, yet without spectacle. Boats depart in low light, engines muted as much as possible. The shoreline recedes into shadow, punctuated by distant flashes of artillery. She remains seated among other soldiers. Some wounded, some silent, some staring back toward the coast as if sight alone might preserve it. She does not speak. Her hands rest lightly against the rifle, fingers tracing wood worn smooth by repetition. You feel how the narrowing of the world reverses. The field that once filled her glass shrinks into coastline. The trench becomes memory. Distance expands outward instead of inward. The war, once confined to meters, stretches again into vastness. In Moscow, the reception is different. There are no trenches here, no frost pressed into cloth. Instead, there are offices with polished floors and controlled light. Her uniform is inspected. Her tally is reviewed. The arithmetic, once whispered between dugouts, is recited formally. She stands still, not in concealment, but in presentation. Her rifle is no longer raised in glass alignment. It is held at rest. The hands that cleaned it nightly now rest openly at her sides. You notice how stillness changes meaning. On the line, stillness concealed. Here, stillness displays. The discipline remains, but its context has shifted. Speeches reference her count. Her name is spoken clearly now, attached to phrases of resilience and sacrifice. She listens without visible reaction. The frost that once numbed her forearms does not translate into words. The arithmetic becomes emblem. Each confirmed entry is framed as evidence of collective strength. The subtraction of enemy presence is transformed into narrative reinforcement. The war requires symbols as much as it requires precision. She remains aware of terrain beneath rhetoric. The broken wall, the ridgeline depression, the tremor of earth beneath artillery. These details do not disappear because applause echoes in halls far from frost. You sense the quiet resistance in memory. Removal has changed her position, but not the discipline forged through repetition. The rifle will be used again, though perhaps not in the same soil. The arithmetic may continue, but its context has widened. Night settles over the city. Lights burn steadily. The air smells of smoke, but not from nearby bombardment. She cleans the rifle in a room rather than trench. Bolt removed. Barrel swabbed. Oil applied. The ritual remains unchanged. The line of earth lies far behind. Yet its imprint remains within her posture, within the measured way she breathes, within the patience that does not dissolve under recognition. Removal has occurred, but endurance persists. A voice in distant halls. The hall is warm, not with the heat of summer sun on churned soil, but with bodies gathered beneath electric light. The air does not carry the scent of frost or dust. It carries perfume, polished wood, the faint trace of tobacco smoke lingering above coats and collars. Rows of chairs face a raised platform where microphones stand waiting. She stands behind one of them. The rifle is absent. Her hands rest instead against a wooden podium, its surface smooth beneath her palms. The stillness she learned in frost returns here, though the ground beneath her feet is solid and clean. She does not shift weight unnecessarily. She does not allow nervous motion to interrupt posture. You notice how silence differs indoors. On the line, silence is fragile and absolute. It is broken only by wind or distant artillery. Here, silence hums with anticipation. The murmur of voices fades gradually as attention gathers. The quiet is not concealment, but expectation. Her name is introduced clearly. It carries across the hall without distortion. It does not need confirmation through glass. Applause follows, brief but substantial. She waits for it to subside before speaking. Her voice is steady. It is not raised in dramatic cadence. It does not rush. The discipline that once governed breath before a shot now governs speech before a sentence. She speaks of frost, of endurance, of the necessity of patience. She speaks of the arithmetic not as triumph, but as duty fulfilled. You sense how distance changes again. The field that once narrowed to meters now stretches across oceans. The audience before her has not pressed into earth. They have not memorized ridgelines under heat shimmer. Yet they lean forward, attentive to a front they know only through reports. She describes stillness. Not the shot, not the recoil, but the waiting that precedes it. She speaks of lying for hours with breath counted carefully, of measuring wind by movement of grass. The hall listens, perhaps expecting more dramatic imagery, yet remaining quiet as she speaks of restraint. The microphone carries her words farther than a rifle ever could. They travel into newspapers, into broadcasts, into conversations in rooms far removed from trench lines. Her presence here is no longer defined by concealment. It is defined by representation. You observe how the arithmetic becomes narrative. Her tally is cited in introduction, repeated in headlines, framed as testament to resolve. The number that once existed quietly in ledger now echoes across public space. She remains measured. Applause rises again when she concludes. She does not linger in acknowledgement. Her posture remains aligned, as if the podium were another contour of earth demanding steadiness. After the speech, she moves through lines of hands extended in greeting. Some grasp firmly, some gently. Faces lean close, asking questions about terrain, about endurance, about what it feels like to wait so long in frost. She answers without embellishment. You sense the widening gulf between experience and curiosity. Those who ask have not felt the ache in shoulder sustained over hours. They have not counted breath to steady crosshair. Yet their interest carries sincerity. The war demands understanding beyond front lines. She steps outside later into cool evening air. The city lights reflect faintly against low clouds. The noise of traffic replaces distant artillery. She pauses briefly, inhaling air that carries no scent of dust. The rifle remains absent. In its place is memory of glass and distance. The discipline that steadied aim now steadies voice. The endurance that sustained stillness now sustains representation. You feel how removal has extended her role. No longer confined to frost-bound depressions, she stands as embodiment of arithmetic once recorded quietly. The ledger has transformed into speech. Yet beneath applause and electric light, the memory of Earth remains. The line of sight, once measured in meters, has become measured in attention. Travel alters the rhythm of days. Trains move through landscapes that blur beyond windows. Stations appear and vanish with mechanical regularity. Applause in one hall fades as another awaits. The schedule is precise, though the terrain is unfamiliar. She moves from city to city as part of a delegation, her name printed on programs alongside others. The war remains constant. Even as she crosses borders, the front continues its slow arithmetic. Reports arrive daily. Positions shift. Losses mount. The subtraction she once enacted through glass now unfolds on a scale too vast for any single reticle to contain. You notice how the body remembers soil even in polished spaces. In hotel rooms with carpeted floors, she still places boots neatly beside the bed. In dining halls lit by chandeliers, she measures her movements carefully, as if the clink of cutlery might carry farther than intended. The discipline of concealment lingers, though concealment is no longer required. Questions follow her consistently. Journalists lean forward with notebooks poised. They ask about courage, about fear, about the moment before a shot. She answers without dramatizing the recoil. She returns often to waiting, to patience, to repetition. The arithmetic, she explains, was never about individual glory but about necessity. In one hall, she stands beneath banners heavy with fabric and light. An audience rises before she speaks. The applause is sustained, almost overwhelming in volume. She remains still until it recedes naturally. Her voice, when it begins, is measured as always. You sense the shift in meaning around her count. Where once the number was entry in ledger, now it is rallying cry. It is invoked to inspire production, to encourage enlistment, to affirm resolve. The arithmetic has become symbol. She does not alter her tone to match the magnitude of reaction. She speaks of frost and soil, of wind direction, of the difficulty of remaining motionless for hours. Some listeners nod solemnly. Others seem surprised by the absence of dramatic flourish. After speeches, there are meetings in quieter rooms. Officials thank her for service. They discuss morale, international support, alliances strengthened through presence. Her role has extended beyond the field entirely. She listens attentively, offering brief responses. You observe how stillness becomes composure. The same restraint that governed her trigger finger now governs her expression. She absorbs praise without expansion. She absorbs expectation without visible strain. At night, when the hall empties and the delegation disperses, she stands by a window. City lights stretch in ordered lines. The sky glows faintly above rooftops. There is no wind bending grass, no ridgeline casting shadow. The absence of terrain feels almost unnatural. She closes her eyes briefly. Memory returns not as spectacle, but as texture. The weight of rifle against shoulder. The cool press of frost through fabric. The faint tremor of earth beneath artillery. These sensations remain sharper than applause. You feel the distance between representation and repetition. The arithmetic has been magnified, yet the daily discipline that produced it cannot be reproduced in halls. Here, endurance takes different form: sustained attention, measured speech, unbroken composure. The tour continues. Cities change. Languages shift slightly. Applause rises and falls in varying cadence. Through it all, her posture remains constant. The rifle, when present for ceremonial display, rests clean and unused, bolt intact, barrel polished. It is shown as instrument of resolve rather than pressed into soil. The glass, if attached, reflects electric light instead of dawn. You sense the paradox. The farther she moves from the front, the more her connection to it defines her. The frost-bound depression that once concealed her now anchors speeches delivered across oceans. Yet beneath banners and microphones, the discipline endures. When the tour concludes, she returns east. The train carries her back toward a war still unfolding. The applause fades behind her. The arithmetic resumes without interruption. She cleans the rifle once more upon return. Bolt removed. Barrel swabbed. Oil applied sparingly. The ritual reconnects her to repetition. The voice in distant halls falls quiet. The line of earth awaits again. Return to the line. The air at the front carries a different weight than the air in cities. It is heavier with residue, smoke that never fully clears, dust that settles into seams and remains there. When she steps from transport back into a sector near the line, the first sensation is not sound, but texture. The ground is uneven beneath her boots. The horizon feels closer. Her uniform has been pressed recently. The fabric still holds a faint crease from ceremonial presentation. Within hours, that crease disappears. Soil finds its way back into folds. The rifle rests against her shoulder with familiar gravity. You notice how quickly the body recognizes terrain. Even before she lies down, posture adjusts. Steps shorten automatically near exposed ground. Shoulders lower instinctively when crossing open spaces. The discipline formed through months of repetition returns without conscious command. The trench she joins is not the same as the one she left. Different faces. Different sectors. The ridgeline here rises more sharply. The soil is darker, more compact. Yet the essentials remain unchanged. Sandbags, duckboards, muted conversation beneath threat. Some soldiers recognize her name. A few glance with curiosity. Others nod simply, more concerned with their own tasks than reputation. The war has grown since her departure. Casualties have multiplied. Recognition competes with fatigue. She does not linger in introduction. Instead, she requests position. She studies the field from a shallow depression chosen for concealment. The glass rises once more. The circle forms. You feel the narrowing of the world reassert itself. The broad landscapes crossed by train shrink into meters again. The arithmetic, once magnified by speech, becomes once more a matter of wind and distance. The terrain here demands new memorization. A stand of trees along one flank. A trench zigzagging irregularly across a slope. A collapsed farmhouse marking moderate range. She catalogues these features silently, committing their shapes to memory as she once did broken walls and ridgelines elsewhere. The body lowers gradually. Elbows into soil. Rifle aligned. Breath measured. The frost is lighter this season, replaced by cool dampness that seeps through cloth more slowly. The air smells of decaying leaves rather than sea salt. The first hours pass without engagement. She observes, measures, adjusts to new wind patterns. The mirage here behaves differently, rising from darker earth in uneven columns. She recalculates instinctively. You sense how removal has not softened discipline. If anything, the absence has sharpened awareness. The glass feels steadier. The trigger rests beneath her finger without impatience. The arithmetic has resumed its earlier scale. A movement near the collapsed farmhouse draws her eye. A helmet rises briefly, then dips. The range is moderate. Wind is steady from right to left. She does not rush. She waits for repetition. The helmet appears again. Slightly higher. Slightly longer. She steadies breath. The crosshair aligns not with urgency, but with familiarity. The rifle answers quietly. The silhouette falls from sight. Dust rises faintly against farmhouse wall. The field resumes its stillness. You notice how the exchange feels unchanged despite widened roll. No applause accompanies the shot. No introduction precedes it. The arithmetic has returned to ledger rather than headline. She remains in position. Anticipation of retaliation governs the next minutes. None comes immediately. The trench behind her remains composed. The day unfolds. Light shifts across slope and tree line. Wind falters and returns. She adjusts without drama. The discipline that once steadied voice now steadies aim. As dusk approaches, she lowers the rifle. The glass reflects fading sky. The field darkens gradually into shadow. The return is complete. The line of earth has accepted her weight once more. The following mornings resemble one another. Mist gathers low along the ground before sunrise. The stand of trees at the flank holds shadow longer than the open slope. Dew settles into grass, darkening fabric where her elbows press. She chooses her position carefully each day, not repeating the exact depression twice in succession. Predictability invites counter-calculation. The rifle settles into her shoulder as it has countless times before. The glass narrows the world into manageable geometry. The collapsed farmhouse becomes fixed point. The zigzag trench reveals small irregularities in its lip where sandbags have shifted. A broken fence post at mid-range marks distance with quiet reliability. You notice how repetition restores equilibrium. The months spent away from frost and soil do not diminish instinct. If anything, they clarify it. The body knows how long it can remain prone before stiffness compromises steadiness. The eye knows when mirage distorts too heavily to risk engagement. The arithmetic resumes its steady rhythm. Another confirmed subtraction one afternoon near the tree line. A careful duel with a distant sniper who exposes himself only briefly. Each exchange measured, deliberate, without flourish. The opposing side adapts quickly. Helmet exposures shorten. Decoy movements appear more frequently. A rifle barrel rises alone once, detached from any visible body. She does not fire at the decoy. The arithmetic requires confirmation, not impulse. You sense how experience guards against manipulation. The earlier phases of the war taught her terrain. The removal taught her distance of meaning. Now both converge. She remains steady beneath increased scrutiny. Her presence at this sector becomes known, not through announcement, but through quieter patterns. Enemy movement grows more cautious in the zones she watches. A sniper duel lasts nearly an hour one morning, neither side revealing enough to justify risk. The sun climbs slowly overhead. Heat gathers unevenly across darker soil. Mirage bends the image at longer ranges. She narrows focus to mid-distance, allowing extreme range to remain beyond engagement. Adaptation continues without comment. Fatigue returns in familiar shapes. The ache between shoulder blades, the stiffness in neck, the pins of numbness along left thigh. She counters each with measured adjustment masked by wind. You observe how endurance remains the constant thread. Applause in halls did not replace frost. Recognition did not reduce strain. The body still bears weight of hours. The discipline that governs speech in cities now governs silence in soil. One evening, as light thins, a figure rises fully along the trench line, perhaps careless, perhaps desperate. The range is clear. Wind has quieted. She steadies breath and completes the calculation. The rifle responds. The silhouette collapses cleanly. No counterfire follows. The field absorbs the subtraction as always. The ledger, somewhere behind the lines, will receive another entry. She withdraws at dusk. The trench receives her without ceremony. Boots scrape against duckboards. A canteen passes between hands. Conversation drifts toward mundane matters. Supplies, rumors of movement farther north, the steady advance elsewhere along the front. Her name circulates again, but here it remains grounded. Not symbol alone, but consistency. The arithmetic has regained its proper scale, not headline, but habit. You feel how return has sealed the transition. Removal expanded her role. Return reaffirmed her origin. The line of earth once again defines her day. Night settles across the sector. She cleans the rifle in dim lantern light. Bolt removed. Barrel swabbed. Oil applied sparingly. The ritual closes the day as it always has. Tomorrow will repeat. Frost or dew. Glass and distance. The arithmetic of attrition sustained in silence. After the count. There comes a point when the number stops feeling precise, not because it is inaccurate, but because it exceeds what the mind can easily hold as individual memory. Early on, each confirmed subtraction could be recalled in detail: terrain, light, wind direction, posture. Now the tally has grown beyond single images. It has become accumulation rather than sequence. She does not dwell on the total. When it is mentioned, it sounds distant, almost abstract. The ledger continues to receive entries. Officers reference the figure with increasing weight. But on the line, frost still gathers without acknowledging scale. You notice how arithmetic shifts from memory to identity. Where once the number marked duration of service, it now precedes her in conversation. New soldiers arrive having heard it. Some glance toward her with quiet awe. Others measure themselves silently against it. The field remains indifferent. The stand of trees along the flank casts the same morning shadow. The collapsed farmhouse continues to mark mid-range. The trench zigzags unchanged except for minor repairs. The glass narrows the world as always. A duel unfolds one grey afternoon. An opposing sniper has studied her sector carefully. Exposure is minimal. The rifle barrel appears only briefly, then vanishes. She does not fire at suggestion. Minutes stretch into nearly an hour. Both remain patient. You sense how the duel becomes reflection rather than escalation. Each understands the other's discipline. Each waits for deviation rather than seeking dominance. The arithmetic pauses, suspended between two measured breaths. At last, the opposing rifle rises fractionally too high. The adjustment is small, but sufficient. She aligns crosshair and breath. The trigger yields. Through the glass, the rifle slips from sight. The exchange is completed without spectacle. Back in the trench that evening, the number is updated again. It is spoken with gravity now. It approaches a threshold recognized by command and propaganda alike. The arithmetic has crossed from impressive to symbolic. She listens without expression. The frost tomorrow will not weigh more heavily because of the total. The soil will not shift differently beneath her ribs. The rifle will not recoil with greater force. You observe how repetition protects her from inflation. As long as the work remains grounded in terrain and wind, the number cannot fully distort perception. It remains record of duration, not of self. Yet change approaches quietly. Wounds accumulate among comrades. Casualties rise across sectors. The war grinds forward relentlessly. Her continued survival amid mounting losses draws increasing attention. Command begins to reconsider exposure. The calculus that once valued her subtraction of enemy presence now weighs the risk of losing a symbol whose count has traveled widely. Removal hovers again at the edge of decision. She senses it before it is spoken. Assignments shift slightly. She is paired more often with experienced spotters. Positions chosen offer marginally greater cover. The arithmetic, once driven by proximity, begins to be moderated by preservation. You feel the tension between continuation and conclusion. The count grows heavier not in digits, but in expectation. Each new dawn carries both opportunity and scrutiny. She returns to position again. Elbows into soil. Rifle aligned. Glass raised. Breath measured. The field offers no commentary on thresholds. It offers only angles and wind. The threshold is crossed without ceremony. There is no distinct sensation in the shoulder when the number surpasses what others have begun to call extraordinary. The recoil remains identical. The frost presses into cloth with the same indifference. Yet somewhere behind the lines, the tally is marked in thicker ink. She is informed quietly. An officer speaks in measured tones. The figure has exceeded a benchmark recognized across units. It will be reported widely. The arithmetic has reached a point where continuation carries symbolic consequence. You notice how recognition alters atmosphere rather than terrain. The trench does not change shape. The stand of trees casts the same shadow. Yet conversation shifts subtly. Comrades speak a name with more caution, as if proximity to the number requires adjustment in tone. The next morning, she lies in position as always. The rifle rests against her shoulder. The glass narrows the field into manageable distance. A faint mist lingers along the slope, thinning gradually under rising sun. Targets appear and vanish with familiar rhythm. A helmet lifts briefly and retreats. A sleeve extends too far beyond sandbag and withdraws quickly. She remains governed by calculation rather than count. You sense the quiet strain of expectation. Each potential shot now carries weight beyond immediate subtraction. It could extend the tally further, or it could end abruptly through error. The arithmetic presses from both sides. A sniper duel unfolds again near the tree line. The opposing rifle reveals itself in increments. She holds position through prolonged waiting. Minutes stretch toward an hour. The duel becomes test of patience more than of aim. At last, the opposing silhouette commits slightly too far. She steadies breath and completes the calculation. The trigger yields. Through the glass, the rifle slips downward. The exchange ends as quietly as it began. The count grows again. Back in the trench, murmurs spread more quickly than before. The figure is repeated with emphasis. It travels beyond immediate sector almost immediately. Command intervenes more decisively now. She is instructed to reduce exposure in the most contested zones. Her survival has become strategic. The arithmetic, once driven by proximity to danger, is now moderated by preservation. You observe how continuation becomes constrained. Positions assigned offer deeper cover. Spotters rotate more frequently to reduce fatigue. The discipline of stillness remains, but the calculus of risk has shifted. She does not argue. The frost tomorrow will still require endurance. The soil will still demand alignment. Whether positioned slightly farther back or pressed fully into forward depression, the work remains fundamentally unchanged. Yet you feel the beginning of closure within repetition. The count has grown to a scale that will endure beyond this sector. The arithmetic has crossed from ledger to history. Even so, dawn arrives as always. Elbows into soil. Rifle aligned. Glass raised. Breath measured. The field remains indifferent to thresholds. It offers only movement and stillness. The arithmetic continues quietly, even as its meaning expands beyond her control. The quiet aftermath. The war does not end in a single sound. It thins. Reports grow less urgent. The front, once vibrating with constant artillery, falls into longer stretches of quiet. Positions that were once contested daily remain unchanged for weeks. The arithmetic slows not because discipline falters, but because the scale of conflict begins to contract. She remains at the line. The rifle still rests against her shoulder in early light. Frost still gathers in shallow depressions. The stand of trees along the flank casts shadow as it has for months. Yet the tension that once charged each hour has softened slightly. You notice how silence shifts from threat to uncertainty. On some mornings, no movement appears at all. The opposing trench remains still. Helmets do not rise. Rifles do not glint. The glass narrows the world as always, but the circle contains emptiness more often than opportunity. The ledger receives fewer entries. Days pass without confirmation. The arithmetic that once advanced steadily now pauses for extended intervals. The count, already substantial, ceases to grow with the same rhythm. She does not pursue engagement recklessly. The discipline remains intact. A sniper's patience does not dissolve simply because the war approaches conclusion. She lies still for hours, measuring wind and light, even when the field offers no target. You sense how repetition becomes memory in real time. The broken fence post at mid-range has weathered further. The collapsed farmhouse has lost another beam. The trench lip across the slope appears less guarded than before. Terrain once animated by cautious movement now feels abandoned in places. Orders arrive gradually. Positions are consolidated. Units rotate more frequently away from direct engagement. Her exposure decreases not because of her tally alone, but because the front itself is stabilizing. She cleans the rifle nightly as always. Bolt removed. Barrel swabbed. Oil applied sparingly. The ritual continues even when no shot has been fired that day. Maintenance becomes less about preparation for immediate engagement and more about honoring habit. You observe how identity begins to detach from position. The line of earth that once defined her daily posture loosens its hold. The frost that pressed into cloth each dawn will not do so indefinitely. The glass that narrowed distance may soon rest unused. Yet she returns to position until instructed otherwise. Elbows into soil. Breath measured. Glass raised. The final confirmed subtraction comes on an overcast morning. A lone figure crosses open ground carelessly, perhaps unaware of how quiet this sector has grown. The range is moderate. Wind is negligible. She steadies breath and completes the calculation. The rifle responds. Through the glass, the figure collapses against damp earth. No counterfire follows. The field absorbs the change without echo. You feel the subdued quality of the moment. There is no surge of triumph. No escalation. Only the quiet completion of a familiar sequence. Back in the trench, the number is updated once more. It will likely remain there. The arithmetic has reached its conclusion not through proclamation, but through gradual thinning. Dawn will come again. But the line of earth is no longer permanent. When the formal announcement comes, it does not echo across the field. It travels instead through orderly channels. A communiqué read aloud in a trench that has heard louder sounds. The war, in this sector, has concluded. Positions are to be held, but not advanced. Fire is to be returned only if necessary. She listens without visible shift in posture. The rifle rests across her knees rather than aligned against her shoulder. The glass remains capped. The soil beneath her boots is cool, but no longer demands concealment. You notice how stillness changes meaning once more. On the line, stillness concealed intent. In distant halls, stillness conveyed composure. Now it becomes transition. The posture of readiness loosens gradually, though habit resists abrupt change. The trench empties in stages. Sandbags remain. Duckboards creak under lighter traffic. Equipment is inventoried and redistributed. Some soldiers depart for new assignments. Others linger, uncertain of what follows. She cleans the rifle again. Bolt removed. Barrel swabbed. Oil applied. The ritual feels different now. Not preparation for tomorrow's frost, but closure of repetition sustained across years. The arithmetic stands complete. Its total has already traveled beyond this sector, beyond this front. It will appear in reports and citations, in speeches and documents preserved long after trenches fill with rain and grass. You sense the quiet detachment from the number itself. It no longer grows. It no longer demands extension. It remains fixed, as memory rather than task. She walks once more across the ground she has watched through glass. The collapsed farmhouse stands in partial ruin. The stand of trees along the flank holds steady. The broken fence post leans slightly farther than before. Without rifle raised, the distances feel broader, less intimate. The earth bears faint depressions where bodies once lay prone. Some are hers. Some belong to others. The soil has begun to reclaim them. Grass edges into shallow grooves. Rain will smooth what remains. You feel how terrain forgets faster than history remembers. The field that defined her daily discipline does not preserve tally invisible marks. It absorbs all weight equally. Transport arrives to carry units away. Boots climb into trucks without urgency. Engines start without concealment. The front dissolves into memory measured not in meters, but in years. She sits among departing soldiers, rifle secured but unused. The glass, once pressed to eye each dawn, rests capped against wood. The breath that once steadied crosshair now steadies transition into unfamiliar routine. You sense how identity shifts without spectacle. No applause accompanies departure. No banners hang above trench. Only the gradual absence of repetition. The line of earth no longer requires her weight. The arithmetic has ended. Yet the discipline it forged remains. The earth remains. Years pass. The trench collapses slowly under rain and thaw. Sandbags rot where they were once stacked with urgency. The collapsed farmhouse yields further to weather, beams sinking into softened soil. Grass grows over shallow depressions that once held elbows steady at dawn. The stand of trees along the flank thickens with new branches. Wind moves through leaves without memory of crosshairs. The broken fence post finally falls, surrendering to rot rather than recoil. The ridgeline, once memorized in detail through glass, becomes simply a curve in the land. You stand at the edge of this field in imagination. There is no frost pressed against uniform now. No rifle aligned with breath. The distances feel broader without the narrowing circle of glass. What was once measured in meters stretches back into horizon. The arithmetic remains recorded elsewhere, in documents preserved carefully, in citations framed behind glass of a different kind, in histories that recount numbers as evidence of endurance and cost. The tally endures in ink long after soil has reclaimed impressions. Yet the earth does not carry digits. It holds only the quiet accumulation of seasons. Rain smoothing scar, snow covering uneven ground, sunlight bleaching remnants of wood and wire. You sense how repetition outlasts conflict. The discipline of lying still for hours becomes story. The frost that numbed fingers becomes anecdote. The breath counted carefully before each shot becomes rhythm remembered in words rather than muscle. Her name travels through years. It appears in books, in lectures, in classrooms where students trace the outline of a front line across maps. The number attached to it remains fixed, a symbol of endurance within a conflict vast beyond individual measure. But here, in this field, the arithmetic has dissolved into earth. Grass bends in wind that once masked subtle movement. Shadows lengthen across ridgeline without concealment or threat. The sky reflects quietly above terrain no longer divided by trench and wire. You feel the distance between memory and soil. History preserves count. The earth preserves contour. The rifle that once pressed against shoulder rests in a museum case somewhere, metal cleaned, wood polished, glass reflecting controlled light. Visitors pause before it, reading placards that summarize arithmetic in brief lines. Yet the stillness that defined those mornings cannot be fully displayed. It existed in frost and heat, in the weight of hours sustained without spectacle. It lived in the narrow circle of glass where distance collapsed into precision. The earth remains. It receives rain without prejudice. It grows grass over former depressions. It erases the shallow grooves where elbows once anchored. You stand quietly at the edge of that memory. Wind moves across open ground. The war has ended. The arithmetic has settled into record. The line of earth no longer requires concealment. Only the quiet remains. And beneath it, the patient land, unchanged in its willingness to hold and to forget. You've been part of echoes of war, where stories rise on quiet wings, and the past still circles above us, refusing to land.